Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for our first official virtual happy hour. I am thrilled to have Leigh Fatzinger here with me. He is the CEO and founder of Turbine Labs, and of course now the Neutral, which we're going to talk a lot about today. I know, mind blown. And I feel like I have to disclaim this on every live stream that you may hear little voices in the background. You know, we're all at home, working from home, playing from home, living from home, never leaving home. And I have incentivized my children with ice cream at the end of this if they can refrain from fighting during this time that is the witching hour. So Leigh, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Sarah. Don't we love this time? It's amazing. I love it. I love all the screaming in the background, you know, the bribery. Like we're just, we're like, how do we figure out what's next to bribe? Like you said,
I don't know. The rules are out the window.
Yeah, today's ice cream, but it could be, you know, like we've gone to cash. I got a 7 and 11-year-old. I think yours are a little younger, but
yeah.
we've gone straight to cash. And the great thing about giving them cash is it's basically worthless.
Yeah,
right?
what are you gonna do with it? Nothing.
What are you gonna do with it? You know, so yeah.
We're gonna have to get out some coins or something.
Right.
But the one thing I do like about all this is that it's real, and that's what my husband keeps reinforcing every day when I tell him some of our experiences or what's been going on. He says, "But Sarah, this is real, and haven't you always said you want to see more realness from people?" And I see a distinct difference. Even last summer, we had a few weeks where camps didn't overlap, and we had some childcare issues, so I worked from home for a week or two, and I found that people were way less understanding or maybe finding things as comical as they do now. So I think those are things for the better.
Right. Totally. There's so many things that, by the way, I just heard like footsteps. We're talking about real. It's my wife walking into the room, right? Like,
she's like out.
So yeah, she has a bowl of popcorn over there. And that's just it's gonna start, throwing it at me. So, I think we're obviously, it's easy to get sort of caught in the fact that over 1 million people, almost 2 million people, maybe over 2 million people now, I haven't checked the numbers today, have been impacted by this, countless millions more families. And then, a third or half or 3/4 of the planet just impacted with this. There's a lot to be really thoughtful about and obviously pained over. And then there are a few other things like what we're going through that don't have an Instagram filter on them anymore. And we're together. Hopefully families are together, and we're communicating in entirely new ways. And so there is some good that has come from this. And I hope more will come from it. But I love the fact that your kids are in the background. I don't know what the vibe was that we gave ours, but yeah.
Well, I mean, and this is not my real home. This is a beautiful green screen because it's a very white wall in my kitchen because I call it my command central station. And I just need it to look like I have a change of scenery. So this is my essential filter right now.
Well, I want to say this is not really my kid's old bedroom. This is a green screen that's designed to look like my kid's old bedroom that we had to convert into an office after we all went remote working. So yeah, I'm in the same place. But yours looks a lot better.
Oh, well, thanks. I do want to say hello and welcome to everyone that is joining us. We are going to get into the meat, the heart of our conversation in just a bit, but I know it's a virtual happy hour. I am choosing my energy drink to partake in because I get a little tired this time of day. But for all of you who are coming in, I want you to feel free to ask questions, talk about your experiences, advice, tips, thoughts, anything you want to share in the comments, or you can tweet questions to me at PR Sarah Evans. I'm going to pull up my second screen tab here so that people can jump in and chat with us. So with us today, one more time, is Leigh Fatzinger. He is the founder and CEO of Turbine Labs and also now the Neutral. So I really want to talk about the Neutral first, Leigh, and I want you to tell us what it is and why you thought, hey, this seems like a good idea during a pandemic to do something completely new.
Right.
I'm going to pull up the screen here.
Right. Oh my gosh, there it is.
Look at it.
As you said, first, we have a company called Turbine Labs. And Turbine Labs is a software platform that's designed to help primarily C-level executives and politicians make better sense of their world in this era of so much information and information overload, misinformation and noise. And in January, actually, we started tracking COVID-19 and trying to understand if there was more noise around COVID-19 than there was sort of substance, because the stock market was doing really interesting and volatile things, and countries were starting to get prepared for what we then found out was about to be a pandemic. And we had a customer of ours on the enterprise side who said, can you send us some intelligence around what's really happening with COVID-19? We started doing that in February, and it was a morning kind of newsletter like thing that basically just said, here's what's going on with the media growth and the social media growth of this topic. And then all of a sudden, our customer liked it, and we said, geez, maybe what we should do is just give this information to anybody who wants it. And we'd never done that before. We never tried to format our software output for consumers. It just wasn't built that way. But we did anyway in late February, and then all of a sudden the thing kind of took off, and a lot of people started being interested in this email that we were sending out about what was happening in the world around COVID-19. And it got me thinking about an idea that I had a long time ago, which was, how do you get both sides of an issue, and how do you sort of filter out noise, and how do you feel comfortable after you've consumed news that you have the information rather than feeling kind of gross? And I know a lot of people feel kind of gross after they interact with the news right now.
I know I do, and I know people sending me news and information, my text messages. I need to clean my phone after I get some of them.
That's right. And I've always been kind of a news junkie. In fact, in 10th grade, maybe it was 10th or 11th grade, I didn't go to a lot of class, but what I did do was I would leave my house and I would go to this Albertsons that was near our house. And I used all the money that I kind of earned or gotten from my parents to buy 4 newspapers every single day. I bought the Denver Post, the Rocky Mountain News, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. And that's kind of what I did all day. I was in class.
I love this already.
I was reading newspapers. And so I've always been kind of a news junkie. And, being a news junkie, and when you have access to all this, all these apps and everything like that have news, you can certainly feel overwhelmed. And when I would read a story and I found something that I didn't agree with, I always try to go to a different app and try and find a counterpoint. Or I would try and find, like, if I read something on Fox News, was the New York Times covering it? Or if I read something in the Wall Street Journal, was MSNBC saying, the same thing? And what you see is that even on the exact same topic, there's a tremendous amount of variation that happens within the story. And I realized that if you were interested in having both sides of the story for any given topic, it was not easy to get that information. And the second thing that I realized is that this is what Turbine Labs does for politicians and lobbyists and C-level executives. Is our job is to give them information that sort of gives them, sometimes it's bad news, sometimes it's good news, but it's always sort of right down the middle. It doesn't try and color it in any way. And what we realized is that through this email briefing that we were doing for COVID-19, which we've now, by the way, done almost 60 editions of this news briefing. It keeps growing every single day.
I love them. I rely on it in the morning, just so you know.
So thank you. And so do I. And a lot of people tell us that it's the place that they go to get their news on COVID-19, and then they sort of shut it off. And they compartmentalize what's happening, because if you spend all day in it, you'll just go crazy, right? So we realized that through this email briefing that we could probably do this for other topics as well. And we're already ingesting all kinds of news data and all kinds of social media data. And we already employ over a dozen full-time staff reporters and journalists on our team. And so we just came up with a concept of the neutral 6 weeks ago, actually. And So we had this idea, and we went out and we got the domain name, and we said we're going to build a news site. And here it is, launched last Thursday on Product Hunt. And
which was amazing. It was one of the top products of the day. So way to go.
Yeah, thank you very much. And at the same time, we were able to give a little support out to the Online News Association, as well as Economic Hardship Reporting Project, which supports and gives grants to newly unemployed journalists, which is really important. And
in fact, they're giving out hardship grants right now of $500 to $1,500 to U.S. journalists, and you can go to their Twitter feed. It is at Econ Hardship to get more info and to apply. And I'll put a link in the comments.
That's great. That's great. So we were able to give a little donation out to both of those organizations, and then really see, is there an appetite out there for people who want to have this exercise of, I don't necessarily believe in one source, but it's a whole lot of effort to go get a balanced perspective on and get both sides of the story. And that's really what the neutral is. We use original journalism at the top part of every single story. The second part of the story is a balanced perspective. So you may
click on one of the stories. I want to show them that cool that breakdown.
Paul Manafort, right? President's former aide. This individual is a polarizing figure, right? And so the headline to this particular story, which was published yesterday by one of our journalists, Annalisa Romano, the idea is that you get the base facts of what happened. So no one disagrees that Paul Manafort was President Trump's former campaign manager, right? So we present the facts in what we call the neutral zone of the story. And then the media contribution section is designed to take stories that are along the same lines of this topic, but have different perspectives, whether it's political or scientific or whatever. And so you can see how different news organizations frame this story about Paul Manafort being released. And then the other thing we do is we put in social media posts from verified influencers on Twitter, so you can see statements from people who are influential.
So how do you actually find those, Leigh? I'm really curious about that, because it's easy to say influence or to pull, just pull someone who has a lot of followers. Do you have an AI on the background, or in the background? What actually helps you select those?
So we've been building our platform, which is AI, artificial intelligence, and natural language processing for the last 6 years. We ingest a huge amount of news and social media data to help us with the selection of the content, but a machine can't do all of the work. If you've ever read a story that's been written by a machine, you can tell that the story has been written by a machine. And so, journalists are extraordinarily important, and to helping us understand what is happening with any given event, political, scientific, pandemic, what's happening with your local sports team. It doesn't really matter. Journalists, we need human beings who've been trained in objectivity to report on what they see. But the trust in the media is at an all-time low, and media business models aren't working very well. We've got a lot of people that are journalists that are going out of work. Tens of thousands have been laid off in the last 8 weeks alone. And you got newspapers that are going to go out of business because they don't have sustainable business models. So the other thing that we realized out of this was that we can provide exposure to news organizations, and many times unique news organizations, because we have a machine pulling all this in first, and expose people to sources that they may not have seen before. So for example,
this is one of my favorite parts, Leigh. This is one of the things that I've been talking to journalists about that they're really looking forward to, is where are these sources? How can we get them visibility and also send traffic?
Right. So Sarah, are you a subscriber of the Greenville News or the Big Rapids Pioneer?
I am not, and I wouldn't really likely have a chance to come across them.
Right, exactly. So as it relates to Paul Manafort's early release from prison because of COVID-19 being in his prison, that again, that's a very polarizing story depending on which side of the aisle that you're on, right? And our job is not to judge which side of the aisle you're on. We got basically half the country on one side and half the country on the other side, but they're all in their corners. No one's in the middle of the public square, having conversations about, was this the right thing? Was this the wrong thing? It's not up for me or you to decide whether or not it's the right thing or a wrong thing. We could talk about it. But if I read my news from one single source and you read your news from an opposing source, let's say I'm the Fox News person and you're the CNN person, the chances of us having a conversation are pretty small, right? We're just going to end up bickering or just go, we can't talk about that because we're just going to agree to disagree. And what we realized out of this is that if we start off with this sort of baseline of facts, no one can dispute that Paul Manafort, it was Trump's former campaign manager. And then our audience can go and see how CBS Sacramento reported on this in a different way from the Greenville News, or how CNN and Big Rapids Pioneer had different perspectives. And now we can start seeing how the media and how humans adjust the story based on their own points of view. And that's just human nature. But it's been very hard to get all of this in one place into a story that takes, as you can see here, 3 minutes to read.
So I love everything that you've done with this, and I'm really committed to the, mission and the purpose behind what you're doing. What I'd love to do now is push a little bit, dig a little bit on the actual launch process, because it's not easy to get something up and running like this and finding a way to say it's good enough, it's time to go live. So
I can see my wife nodding on the, over here on the side.
She's a saint. But one of the things that you've been doing, I know, is you're still employing folks. This obviously takes a lot of bandwidth, a lot of woman and manpower to get this up and running. So what does it look like on the back end from a business perspective to execute this idea?
Yeah. So, we sent all of our employees into remote working I think it was March 12th, just about 2 months ago. And one of the things that was really important to me is, there's really kind of two camps of startups, right? Those that, wanted to sort of reduce costs really, really quickly, and because there's uncertainty, coming forward. And those, including, initiatives that have been put out by, Salesforce, Mark Benioff, and Guild Education in Denver to say, we're going to get through this. We're not going to lay people off. And so, philosophically, we fell into the latter camp of saying we're going to do our very best to not only survive through this, but thrive. And what we realized is that we've got this really talented team of engineers and product managers and account managers and obviously journalists. And we actually saw that we have some gaps within our day because of our normal business, where we can put out content, and effectively we're using the same resources that we have for our enterprise customers, but we're because we're not customizing it so much for them, we can put it out into the general public without any conflicts. And so we were lucky in that we had sort of the resources in place to be able to do something like this in this time. So that's the first key. Is I don't think that we would have started this in the middle of March if we didn't already have some of the infrastructure. So let's be honest. It's not it's miraculous in that we got a site stood up and we came up with the concept and we got all the sort of administrative things that we need to get done. And people worked a lot of hours, through March and through April to get this done so we could launch on May 7th, a week ago. But at the same time, we had some of this stuff in place, and then, rather than us sort of hunkering down in the pandemic, we said to ourselves as an executive team and really our whole company, how do we get creative? What can we do to help other people make sense of the world? Because we have, we're we're with lack of a better term, blessed in the sense that I get all the news delivered into my enterprise platform. I get all the social media. It's not difficult for me to get an objective view on a news event, but it's really hard for the majority of the public to get an objective, balanced view on any given news event. And so our philosophy, it sort of started with the pandemic of saying, which direction are we going to go? Are we going to hunker down, or are we going to get creative? And we decided to get creative.
And I love that. And we're seeing companies who do that. I mean, it's a great testing ground, to figure out and see what resonates and works. And I've done a little bit of research looking into other news outlets that have launched with a maybe similar concept or shared concept. And one of the things I've seen why they don't maintain it's usually due to funding and bandwidth. Those are the two major issues. I've seen some launch with great intent and much like the neutral, free for life, no ads, so that way you don't experience that bias. And I've watched them kind of go by the wayside. So it's amazing to see an organization that has funding and bandwidth and resources start something like this. Do you see it being a long-term venture?
Absolutely. It's really important to me for a number of different reasons. Again, in some ways, it's kind of fulfilling this childhood, or this early adolescence thing that I had of going down to a newsstand and actually having to drop quarters into newsstand machines and pull out
that.
Right. And so, and the reason it was, like pulling out the Denver Post and the Rocky Mountain News and the Wall Street Journal, which is kind of right leaning, and the New York Times is kind of left leaning, and then consuming all of that stuff in a single day, if I could, was, I think that's the real foundation of this. And so that has sort of carried with me throughout my entire career of just being a news junkie and wanting to, be informed. But at the same time, it's important because people really need it right now, and they're really, tired and fatigued of the news that they get. There's way too much partisan bickering. There's way too much, just one-sidism, and I'm not willing to open myself up to new perspectives. So there's a real market need, and if we can showcase the power of our AI and NLP platform through consumers and make it free forever, then that, we believe we'll be able to build a lot of trust, because people will know, hey, listen, we're not in it for the ads. We're not in it for a subscription. We're in it because it's the right thing to do. And that's what makes it really exciting.
And you touched on something that's really important to me. One of the things I was looking at when I was, going through the neutral was kind of like, what is the stickiness factor? How are people going to get exposed to it? Because not everyone loves news as much as you do, or I do, or journalists. So when people are sharing stories from the neutral, they're inherently sharing at least 3 sides to every story. So people can even see when they're clicking off to get more intel, you're inherently offering a balanced view or perspective, which is few and far between. I haven't seen anyone proactively post, here are my thoughts, here are my opposition's thoughts. And I think that's an amazing model and best practice. And it helps us all. I mean, maybe it's a pipe dream, but I'd love to see that become, a common theme for how people share.
It's really interesting. Through April, as we were building this thing, there were topics that were coming up, and I was going into Facebook, and I would take sort of the structure of a story, and knowing that everyone was home and in a lot of cases bored, not doing anything, I would say, okay, listen, take a break from whatever you're doing, put your nonpartisan hat on for a second, and I'm going to give the background of this story, and then I'm going to give you some links to go read, and then I'm going to ask you to comment on this in a respectful way. And it was really interesting to watch people comment on my Facebook profile to say, I really appreciate the fact that you put a Fox News piece right next to the CNN piece so that I could see what the difference was. And so we did a few of these tests through the month of April. And I realized that just by doing that, the discourse in my comments changed. that if I had simply put up a an article with one side, I would get all of my friends who were with me to agree, yes, that's the right position, and all of my friends who were against me to unfriend me on Facebook, right? And what I've seen now that we've started, and we're a week into this, I think we've published 20 or 30 articles. But as we're getting into this, when I look at Facebook now, I say to myself, I don't see how I could look at a post that's one-sided and be able to react to it, in a fair, thoughtful way. And what I really hope is that this becomes kind of the standard, whether we do it or whether a number of news companies choose to go this direction, where when we share content, and sharing content is a big part about how we get our information right now. And Google and Facebook and Twitter and the other social channels have massive amounts of influence because of the virality that they earn. And so what I'm hoping is that people share this and they say, listen, I have a perspective on this particular topic, but I would like for you to, see my perspective as well as the opposing perspective, and then let's talk about it. And so that's why that's where I think we're gonna really start to see people behave differently on social platforms, because they're all tired of the bickering. And
yes.
I think that people are actually more interested in the news than they would poll right now. They're just so fatigued and they're so tired, and they're tired of fighting on social media, right? Or at the Thanksgiving dinner table. And we need something to, as I said earlier, to bring people back into the public square and just have conversations based off of not necessarily about what's true or what's not true, because people see things in different ways, but just let's get to the point where we can actually start talking again.
Absolutely, because you'll get a link, you'll see it goes to a particular news source, and if you're aware of that news source's bias, you immediately just, I think, check out on it without, but if you see it as part of a full scope, I think it offers better opportunity. I have a little person asking, what do you want? What does it show me? Go ahead. Oh, yes, you can have a
And Sarah, it's pretty interesting. We got early feedback, and people were asking us, "Do you want to go ahead and take care of it?" Because you got to take care of that, Sarah. I'm going to take a drink, and you take care of that issue.
It was just a popsicle emergency, and I am A-OK.
We have them. I might have a popsicle emergency pretty soon too.
I hope so.
Somebody asked me early on. They said, "Hey, you don't identify the biases of the publications when you're listing them in the media perspective section." And we thought long and hard about this. And the ultimate decision that we came to was, if we put the bias of the publication, and you have heard of it or you haven't, like the Greenville Times, do you know if they're left or if they lean right, right? So if you put the bias, you won't click on the stories that you don't agree with. And so we intentionally decided to leave the bias leanings out, so that if the Greenville, by the way, candidly, I don't know whether Greenville Times is left or right, but I might click on it because I've never seen that publication before, and I might be induced to reading something that I don't necessarily agree with.
I like that. I didn't think about it that way, and I was probably one of the people who asked you if you were going to do that.
Yeah, right. And so that was really important to, that was a very important sort of strategic decision that we said, we're not going to tell you whether it's left or right. And, we're not the first site to try and do this. But the thing that makes it unique, and the thing that I think has not been tried before, is one, that, we're not telling the party or the reader which sites that we've chosen are left or right. That's part of trust that we're going to build with the audience over time. And the audience does have to trust that we are going to give it a balanced perspective on any story, even if they see publications that they really don't agree with. I mean, really don't agree with. And so, that's just one of the, the features of this is, not highlighting bias, so you can go discover yourself, and then maybe you'll see something you don't agree with, but it'll slightly change your perspective so that you can actually have that conversation with your crazy uncle at Thanksgiving.
I'm a fan of that. If we change tracks again just for a minute and talking about information. So we talked about information overload, and you are finding a way to condense information, make it easy to read, offering multiple perspectives. How do you think people's relationship with information is going to change because of COVID-19, maybe now, during, if there is such a thing as post?
Well, I think the first thing is that the last decade was probably the worst manipulator of information since the printed word, came into being. Very powerful companies and very powerful machines figured out a way to really figure out how to deliver us content that is based on our preconceptions, our existing beliefs, and our affirmations. Right? I mean, if you think about Google, and Google's a miracle of technology. But if you think about Google's purpose is to deliver you what you want. Not necessarily what you need, what you want. Every single search is designed to deliver you what you want, to get as close to the results of the thing that you are searching for. If Google doesn't deliver that, they fail. You don't go back there, they don't sell ads, they don't have a business. Social media early on was exactly the same way. They realized that it can just be a stream, but people don't want to see a stream of everybody's noise. They want to see people that have like interests and so on and so forth. And we saw how that became very, very dangerous sort of mid-decade, right? Where we were being manipulated by, choices on policy, choices on politicians, so on and so forth. And we even saw, the most egregious examples with companies like Cambridge Analytica, who were really trying to understand the roots of your personality so that they could customize information that they knew you would like based off of a lot of different attributes of who you are. So that was really the first sting that we saw of people going, wait a second, I'm being manipulated here in the information that I see. I think we got a little bit better at it, but the next wave came starting in February with COVID-19, and there has never been a more well-documented event in human history than COVID-19. And the result of that has been people are like, I'm checked out. I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Right? So
I feel like, and as someone who consumes a lot of news and information, I feel like I do have a barrier or a wall built up immediately to say, am I being manipulated? I always feel like that's one of my first questions, or what is the bias here, to try to figure out a way to ingest or digest. I'm very open to multiple views. That said, I love that I can go somewhere where I can let that down a bit. And the COVID-19 consumption, I'd say for the first 2 to 3 weeks, actually did increase my own personal anxiety. It got to a point where I said, I have to shut off at a certain point, even though it's for my job and I have to look at trends and see what's going on. Yeah. I had to shut off. It was, even my husband said, it's too much. We need a break.
Well, and this actually came from somebody who just put a comment on, and he said, "Wait, fake news?" ? And so I'll unpack what I think that question actually means. And you're exactly right that there is a tremendous amount of fake news that's still out there, and the amount of fake news is growing, and it's going to continue to grow throughout the election cycle. And it's not just this country's election cycle. Information is going to be used to manipulate people from this point forward. That is a reality. So there are technological ways to solve some of this. But at the same time, producing fake media costs almost nothing, right? Distribution of fake media costs almost nothing. You can have one story of fake news that is, goes all around the world very, very quickly before you stop it. And so the platforms like Google, Facebook, Twitter, and others are putting a lot of money behind making sure that we minimize, to the extent possible, the amount of fake news that we're exposed to. So we don't allow our platform to bring in content from just any site. If we did, we would see that there's rampant manipulation. However, we did have to make a decision as to how far into sort of the left and the right of sort of what we would call salaciousness and misinformation we would go, right? So you have publications, and you may not agree with the New York Times, the Washington Post, or National Review or Fox News, but those are sites where millions and millions of people get their information. So there's a category of news sites. And then there's sites that are even more to the right and left, and then you kind of get to the fringe and so on and so forth. The other debate that we have, and we're still tuning for this, is do we offer content from publications that are known to purposefully, on occasion, put out misinformation? And right now, as it stands, we've set a limit, but we are putting publications where certain friends of mine have said, you can't put that publication in there and consider it to be balanced. And we put in one site, for example, that's the 5,000th most popular website in the world, right? And it's considered to be misinformation by a certain side of the political spectrum. So how do you ignore the 5,000th most popular site in the world? And the way that you do this, Adam, thank you very much for answering the question, is you do it by having 3 other stories that counterbalance that story. So we want to be able to, if somebody reads this particular publication that's very, very biased, they might look at our story and they're going, "Ooh, look, they represent me. That's great." And then they look at other stories that are more neutral and they see a new perspective. So this is something that we're going to have to wrestle with over time. But we are at this point saying we're going to make sure that it's not fake news, but we are allowing very, very biased, borderline salacious publications, because we want people to see what's out there.
And I would say, Leigh, the problem isn't solved yet. I mean, the problem isn't solved yet. And thank goodness you're trying to do something. The worst thing we could do is nothing, right? So it's something you will learn over time. The AI is part of it, but there's still the human component. I mean, our brains are processing this information, and you're making human decisions behind what actually happens. Do you think, just this idea of being human, I feel like this is so prevalent right now. I mean, maybe even overused, saying be human, but this realness, have you found that it's changed your thoughts on business overall? The idea of how you do business, the why of business for you?
Well, I want to. It's a great question. I want to go back to the point you made at the beginning of your statement. This is not going to be perfect right out of the gate.
Sure.
I can tell you from firsthand experience, it is a tall order to launch a news site. I might not wish it on, my worst enemy. It's a lot of work to put something together that tries to take a new angle on how people, see and share and talk about their news. So it's not going to be perfect. We've got a big job of earning the trust of readers over time. So I'll start with that. And we're going to make mistakes also, but we've been very, very open in saying, on any one of our channels, whether it's on Facebook at Read Neutral or on Instagram at Read Neutral, that if we do something that you don't disagree or that you don't agree with, or that you think is, crosses the boundary of the concept, let us know. Tell us, and I think that in itself is refreshing, and so that's the first thing, is that we're not going to be perfect, and it's going to take time for us to get better and get our content ramped up and build trust with the audience. What was the second part of your question, Sarah?
It's okay. It was the human side of things.
Yeah. Right. Thank you.
What has it changed your perspective on how you do business, the why of business?
Yeah, it has. I think emerging out of this, and you see this even more with big companies, that there are companies that are doing a tremendous amount of good in the pandemic to help people. There are companies like Verizon that are, giving away grants to small businesses and and lots of companies are deferring the need to make payments. And so a lot of big businesses are stepping up, which is a great thing to see. I think smaller companies have got to figure out what is our purpose. And if your purpose is just to be in business to make money, you're probably not going to be in business for very long. And so I think you've got to have a broader view of the world and how you can serve outside of from your core business for a lot of different reasons, right? It gets you exposure. It makes people feel good about the things that they do pay for. It might save you a customer, right? You never know what, and you're really an expert at this. You never really know what's going to come out of trying to serve somebody without asking for anything back, and that's a lot of what.
As an expert, Leigh, that no good deed goes unpunished, number one. So I have to approach every scenario and situation with that. All of your blood, sweat, and tears that went into the neutral. It's like you always have to think about that and just stay the course, because long term, where the difference will be made.
Yeah, we got another question, Sarah, that said, "How does the neutral decide what is fake news versus what is a different perspective?" And a lot of that is determined by the publication. So there are publications that primarily peddle and distribute news that is subjective, or it's taking a newsworthy topic and completely blowing it out of proportion. Turbine Labs has been in business for 7 years. We've ingested into our database tables hundreds of millions of articles and posts, and have had our NLP read a lot of this text. And by the way, our natural language processing system reads 54,000 times faster than the average human reader. So we've read a lot of text. We can read War and Peace in about 7 seconds to give you some perspective on that. And so over all of this time, we've been able to get really good judgment on publications that primarily peddle in fake news versus those that are authoritative. And what I like to tell people also is even the most reputable publications make mistakes. And we can name, lots of publications that have made mistakes, even though they're considered reputable. So it's something we always have to watch out for, but we revisit that topic every single day as we bring in more and more content.
I love that answer. And thank you, Paige, for asking. And it's important to ask anytime, you get to a lot of the bigger news outlets and we don't always have an option to ask these sorts of questions and find out and do some digging. It just, the access isn't there. So it's great that you are here with us again and provide that. I wanted to get a little personal with you. I know I got to chat with you earlier this morning and we were talking just about brands and businesses who are just off the mark right now, appearing tone deaf. They are not making the right decisions. And as a business leader and someone now who has 2 businesses under your belt, how hard is it to make the right decision right now? And that can be a very all-encompassing question, whether it's retaining employees, reimbursing money for products you're no longer able to provide, that sort of thing, because we're seeing some people really miss the mark right now.
Yeah, look at that. I mean, you have the other star right here. This is, and by the way, how does that popsicle stay on the stick after the, because we're like 15 minutes into the popsicle emergency. Is this the third one?
No, it's still the first one. She's like,
wow,
somehow magical with them.
Yeah, I don't even know how you do that. And yeah, and you're in a very warm part of the country too. So anyway, decision making gets harder in uncertainty, and I think what one would normally do in a scenario like this is you would rely on a historical precedent. And I'm an avid reader, and so I like to go back and sort of reference, how would Lincoln have handled this, or how would Churchill have handled this, or things like that. The problem is with COVID-19 is, by the way, I could just stop talking, Sarah. We'll get more comments by having your daughter on this thing, then nobody cares about what I have to say. Everyone's looking at your child. This is
yes, we do, Leigh. You keep this going. She's just here as our.
I'm off the hook now. We're just gonna watch your child.
She's used to me interviewing her, but Zuzu, why can't we go outside and do a lot of things right now? What's going on in the world? What's it called?
Look at this.
Do you remember? Okay, she's just gonna do that there.
Yeah,
we tried.
I mean, listen, childhood's an amazing. Like, look at that, just like the joy of a popsicle. But this is different because there's no historical precedent. There's really nothing for us to compare this to, and so I think you have to go with your gut and your principles. And like I told you earlier, I kind of base every one of my decisions as if my child is in the room with me, right, watching how I interact with the other person. And that doesn't mean that you don't have to make really tough decisions, sometimes, and not everyone is going to be happy. That's part of life. But if you approach a decision by saying, listen, here are my two kids, right? I'm gonna just imagine that they're in the room with me, and how should I
literally,
or in the last 2 months, literally. And so that really is kind of my guiding principle of how I make decisions. And I think that tends to, if you want your kids to grow up, and who knows the world that they're going to grow into, but if you want to do that, then doing things like the right thing, the golden rule as it relates to, am I going to refund my customer because I wasn't able to deliver a service? Or am I gonna do the right thing by closing my business because it's the safer thing to do for my customer, right? Which is a gut-wrenching decision because, as you know, having your own business, that is your child, and you can't imagine it not being there. And so, I've used that principle even more now than I did when we were in offices.
I am going to take that and use it moving forward. Speaking of kids and family, one of the other things I wanted to talk to you about, especially because I'm home with my children right now, and they are a bit younger, but the oldest is of reading age. How do we teach them to be balanced news consumers and, teach them good news reading, news sharing, news discussing habits? I don't know that those resources exist, and I would love to be able to teach them.
Yeah, it's such an incredibly important question. And this is the one area that I would say to any child, for the most part, don't do what your parents are doing, right? Because we have gotten into this habit, and this has been built into us over the last 10, 15 years, where if we're news consumers, we tend to sit down in front of a channel, and it doesn't matter whether it's BBC, PBS, Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, it doesn't really matter. You sort of pick your brand, and then you stick with your brand. And as your kids are watching you, you're placing into them a belief system that is based off of a tremendous amount of opinion journalism. People who are not experts in things making assumptions about things, and that is being branded into them, for lack of a better term. And we're all guilty of it. So what I'm trying to do right now with my kids is, first of all, you have to have a baseline respect for the people that we've elected to go into office, even if you don't agree with them, right? Just say, I may, really disagree with the person that's my congressman or my city council person or my mayor or my president, but I still need to have respect for the office that they hold. I think that makes it much easier and is a good defense off of how you consume news. And then the second piece is, how do you present news to them in a way that they can understand, especially around tricky topics? Why are we not going outside today? Well, because there's a bad virus outside. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means we need to stay, 6 feet away from our friends. We did a socially distanced birthday party with some friends last weekend, got out of the car, and the instinct was for the kids to come together and embrace each other because that's what they do, and they haven't seen them for a month and a half. And my son went 6 feet, right? And so now that is training them into something. And there are also people in this country that think that social distancing is a fallacy, right? And so it's also very important to tell your child that while we believe you're doing the right thing, that there are also people that have a different point of view, and that's okay, because we're all different in our own ways. So the way you can do that is by taking something that you agree with and then asking your child, can we explore something that I might not agree with? And it'll hurt. It's going to make you go crazy, and you're like, well, I don't want my child to think that's okay. But having them have that perspective, the earlier you start, I think the better off that they will be.
I love that. I want to get my son to start participating in the news process, and I don't want to make him not like it because I'm forcing him to, but I want him to participate in some things. So I need to come up with a resource or tool to get some headlines just to get him thinking.
Well, candidly, as soon as we launched the Neutral, I got messages from 5 separate teachers. This was not what I expected. I got messages from 5 different teachers that said, I'm going to print these stories out from the Neutral and we're going to use them in our virtual classrooms.
To workshop, right?
Yeah. To workshop, let's go through and let's figure out where are the differences. How do reporters place different topics in different paragraphs? Do certain reporters place things at the bottom of the story because they think that somebody won't read it? You can do a lot if you have, a comparison. It's just really hard to get a comparison.
I absolutely love that. There are other use cases, so maybe that's one of the pieces. Leigh, I really do love, love what you have created and the way you're taking what your kind of main day-to-day businesses and create, fund, and support something new. And behind the scenes, I can say that I'm privy to know that you really do care about journalism and journalists and do a lot to help and support. And I know you've got your heart and intentions in the right place, which is amazing. For those who stayed with us, thank you so much for joining in today. You can actually go visit The Neutral at theneutral.com. And Leigh and his team are very receptive to questions and comments. I know I was lucky enough to check out some of the beta with it and did have lots of feedback and questions. And Leigh, if you had to leave us with one thought right now, it can be business, it can be personal, doesn't matter. What one piece of advice or thought would you offer?
Turn off your television after 6 p.m.
Woo! Okay. Go for a bike ride.
You asked it, and I had no prep that you were going to ask that question. But we need a break. It's funny to be a news site and then tell people don't consume stuff. But everybody needs a break. And it's interesting that the television, especially the television, has become a centerpiece in so many of our lives. And access to television is just ubiquitous. And I shouldn't say that having the television on at 6 p.m. but no television news after 6 p.m. And really no television news before 9 a.m. would be my big advice. And as just as somebody put in the comments, because you can wake up in a calm manner, go to bed in a calm manner. But that would be and I would say that there's probably news organizations that we're bringing in into our platform who would agree with me. But I think the number one thing that we can do right now is take a break from the news, television news after 6 and before 9.
I love that. And my ring light was just knocked over by my daughter. So I'm just picking that up. It almost crashed to the floor. So, of course, that was our one major fiasco. So I really love this concept of doing these virtual happy hours. If you are watching this, I'd love your thoughts or comments on other folks you would like to see join this experience. And I really want to get people like Leigh who are thought leaders, doers, and makers in the world who really are making a difference.
And the next generation of thought leaders that are right next to you.
Yes. And, that is my hope, that this time will somehow be imprinted upon my children. I didn't know about the entrepreneur life, what that looked like. Both my parents are educators, so I'm hoping that they're witnessing some of these things and it will stay with them to know that they can create, which, fingers crossed works for them. But Leigh, thank you. Thank you to your team for helping.
I really appreciate it. Glad to be your inaugural happy hour lunch and learn. And I will be watching these in the future. You're a delightful host for us.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone. Now, please, if it's after 6 o'clock where you are, unplug and enjoy your evening. Cheers.
Thanks so much. Cheers. Thanks, everyone.